Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing you got everything you ever wanted. The dream phone, the dream life, the recognition you swore would finally make you feel complete. And then, why does it still feel like something is missing? Because maybe the problem isn't not having. Maybe the problem is the wanting itself. We live in a time where desire has turned into an obligation. More, better, faster, prettier, more productive. But there's a question almost nobody asks. When did more become the same thing as happy? Today I want to show you something. Desire isn't just a feeling, it's a system. And when it has no brakes, it turns into a treadmill. You run and run, and you never arrive. The question in this video is simple and uncomfortable. Does wanting more help you grow, or does it keep you stuck? If you've ever felt like you're always chasing something and still never getting there, stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll have a completely new way to understand your desires, and maybe learn how to use wanting without being used by it. Desire is born from a wound, the feeling that something is missing. It's not a psychological flaw. It's part of how the human soul is built. We want because we don't have. We chase because we feel an emptiness. And that changes everything. If desire is lack, it can make us great because it pushes us to seek, but it can also make us prisoners because it pushes us to seek in the wrong place. In the Symposium, Plato puts Eros at the center of the conversation. But Eros, there isn't some cute little Cupid. He's restless, hungry, clever, always in between. In Diotima's teaching, Eros isn't a complete, satisfied god. He's the child of Penia, poverty, and poros, resourcefulness, born from need and from skill. That's desire, an impulse that comes from emptiness, but invents strategies to try to fill it. When you feel like you need more, it's not just being picky, it's Eros making noise inside you. But Plato asks a dangerous question. What do you think is missing exactly? Because the lack can be real, but the way you interpret that lack can be an illusion. You might feel a lack of meaning and call it a lack of money. You might feel lonely and call it a lack of the perfect person. You might feel insecure and call it a lack of beauty. The soul feels a hole, and the world offers lids, and a lot of lids work. For a few minutes, here's Plato's sharpest point. Desire can trap us in appearances. It can make us love the image instead of the real thing. Deep down, Plato is saying there's a kind of desire that makes us more blind than alive. It feeds on shine, status, approval, the need to look like something. It doesn't want truth. It wants the feeling of winning. And that explains why sometimes a person gets what they wanted, and instead of peace, feels a strange emptiness. The lack comes back. The soul is still hungry. If you look at history, you can see this pattern everywhere. Cities and empires driven by the desire for glory, conquest, and recognition. Think about the elites of Athens, the pride of the city-states, the competition for honor. Lack turns into ambition. Ambition turns into a race. The race turns into war. Plato lived in a world where public opinion, doxa, could feel like destiny, and that shaped him deeply. The desire to be applauded can be more dangerous than the desire for food, because applause has no bottom. Today you want 100 people validating you. Tomorrow you want 1,000. Then 1,000,000, and even then, it still doesn't feel like enough. And this is where Plato feels uncomfortably modern. In an age where the whole world fits into a feed, we're trained to desire what shows up. Appearance becomes the compass. Comparison becomes a sport, and the lack that could push us toward a more truthful life gets hijacked by images. You don't desire the good. You desire what looks like a successful life. You don't seek wisdom. You seek the feeling of being on top. Plato would call that a soul living on the surface of reality. In the Symposium, desire has a ladder. Diotima describes what later became known as the ladder of love. The impulse starts with the body, with physical beauty, and that's natural. The real question is whether you get stuck there or climb. As you mature, you begin to love beauty in souls, in virtue, in just laws, in art, in knowledge, until you reach what Plato calls the form of beauty. Beauty itself, not the beauty of one specific thing. Then desire becomes a force of inner education. It stops being I want to own and becomes I want to understand. Notice how human this is. Plato isn't demonizing desire. He's saying desire is an engine, but it needs direction. Without direction, it turns into addiction to novelty. It turns into hunting. It turns into anxiety. With direction, it becomes ascent, growth. The same hunger can drag you into an endless cycle of consumption, or it can lead you to a clearer, more awake life. Desire isn't just wanting more, it's wanting better. But this climb doesn't happen by itself. It takes a kind of courage, looking at yourself and admitting that a lot of times we desire things to numb ourselves. Plato keeps returning to the idea of educating the soul learning to tell the difference between immediate pleasure and what's genuinely good. And here he touches a timeless theme. Desire isn't always a reliable guide. It's energy. The problem is when the energy becomes the government. Plato has a famous image in the Republic. Even though our focus here is the symposium, it helps explain the mechanism, the soul as a city with different parts. There are impulses, emotions, and reason. When the impulsive part rules, the inner city turns into chaos. When reason rules, it doesn't mean coldness, it means order. In Plato, reason isn't the enemy of desire. It's the art of directing desire towards something that's actually worth it. And then a question that hits our time, and probably the future. What happens when machines are designed to capture our sense of lack? If desire is lack, and lack can be manipulated, then an entire culture can be built to keep you feeling incomplete. The more needy you are, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to sell to, persuade, and control. Plato would probably see this as a high-tech version of the old tyranny of appearances, a society where the shadow comes in 4K quality and truth feels boring. The difference is that now the shadows arrive with notifications. But Plato offers a path. Turn desire into a search for truth. And that starts with a shift in how you look. When you feel that restlessness, I need more, you can pause and ask, more of what? Exactly? More approval? More power? More money? More attention? Or more meaning? More clarity? More inner quality? Plato is asking for something that takes work, but frees you, replacing automatic desire with conscious desire. That's what makes Eros so ambiguous and so powerful. He's a lack that can become a prison or a ladder. He can keep you orbiting images or push you toward a higher, truer, more whole life. In Plato, desire isn't just an emotion. It's philosophical force. It reveals what you believe the good is. So if you want to truly know yourself, there's a simple and brutal clue. Watch what you desire when nobody's watching. Plato puts responsibility in our hands. You can't kill desire, but you can educate it. And maybe the real question is wanting more the problem? But why does what you want always feel insufficient? If your lack is being filled with appearances, it will come back. But if it's pointing to something deeper truth, real beauty, meaning, then desire stops being torment and becomes a path. For Aristotle, desire isn't an enemy you need to crush. It's a normal part of being human, just as natural as feeling hungry or wanting respect. The real issue is different. Desire needs shape. It needs to be educated, trained, tuned like an instrument. Without that training, it turns into excess, shortage, and confusion. With training, it becomes energy for a good life. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle starts with a simple but deep idea. Every human action aims at some good. We choose things because they seem good, useful, or pleasant. The problem is that not everything that seems good is actually good for an entire life. That's where his central concept comes in. Eudaimonia, usually translated as happiness, but closer to human flourishing, is not a quick hit of joy. It's the overall quality of a life. And if the good life is the goal, then desire has to be aimed at that goal, not just at whatever impulse shows up in the moment. That changes the question. Instead of, how do I stop wanting? Aristotle asks, how do I want in the right way? And the right way means three things at once: the right amount, the right reason, and the right time. The right amount because excess ruins things. The right reason because some things are worth wanting only as tools, not as final goals. The right time because even something good can become a bad choice if it happens at the wrong moment. Aristotle calls this balance the golden mean. A lot of people misunderstand it, like he's defending a bland life with no intensity. That's not it. The golden mean isn't a mathematical middle. It's the right measure for the person and the situation. Courage, for example, is neither cowardice nor recklessness. Someone might think they're brave because they jump into danger for no reason, but that can just be impulsiveness dressed up as virtue. The desire to prove yourself can create actions that look noble, but deep down are just lack of control. And Aristotle is very honest about us. We're not pure reason. We have passions, habits, tendencies, fears, vanity. That's exactly why ethics isn't just theory, it's practice. He insists virtue isn't born from beautiful speeches, but from repetition, training, and habit. You become just by practicing justice. You become moderate by practicing moderation. Desire isn't retrained only by understanding what's right. It's retrained by living what's right until it becomes second nature. Now think about how this fits real life. A simple example. Someone says, I want to be healthy, but when it's time to choose, they crave short-term comfort. That isn't hypocrisy, it's inner conflict. Aristotle would say, the person hasn't built the habit that lines up desire and reason yet. Virtue, at its core, is when your desire starts to like what truly helps you. It's when discipline stops feeling like war and starts feeling like character. A key word in Nicomachean ethics is phronesis, usually translated as practical wisdom. It's everyday intelligence, the ability to choose well in real situations, because life doesn't give you perfect options. Sometimes you have to choose between two good things or between two lesser evils. Practical wisdom is what keeps desire on track. It asks, does this move me closer to a good life or farther away? That question can sound boring until you realize it can save you years of regret. Aristotle also draws an important line. Some desires are naturally stronger, especially physical pleasures, and that's why they require more training. Not because the body is low, but because it's loud. That's why he talks so much about temperance, not as repression, but as freedom. Temperance is when you can enjoy without becoming dependent, when you choose pleasure without being chosen by it. It's a subtle difference, but a huge one. Pleasure as part of life versus pleasure as the owner of your life. If we look at history, it's easy to see how desire without measure becomes a collective disaster. The chase for unlimited power, unlimited wealth, unlimited expansion. This has fueled wars, colonization, tyranny. When a city or empire loses its sense of purpose and turns into a machine that always wants more, it starts treating people as tools. Aristotle would be direct. That's a sick political life, because the purpose of a community should be to make good living possible, not just to produce domination. And today, the lack of measure has technology behind it. Desire is stimulated on purpose. More consumption, more speed, more performance, more image. Aristotle would warn, when you train your habits toward excess, excess starts to feel normal. What used to be a luxury becomes the minimum. Desire grows and satisfaction shrinks, not because you're weak, but because habits shape the soul's taste. If you train your eyes on exaggeration, simple things start to feel boring. And then you begin living like you're always behind the world. The future will probably amplify this even more. With artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and extreme personalization, life could become even more tailored to your impulses. And that creates a danger. If everything adapts to your desires, you lose the chance to educate your desires. Aristotle would see this as a major ethical problem. A society that maximizes immediate satisfaction can minimize virtue, because virtue requires friction, choice, limits, and time. So what practical alternative does Aristotle offer? First, he gives you a filter: purpose. Always ask, is this a final goal or just a tool? Money is a tool. Status is a tool. Even pleasure can be a tool. If you turn tools into final goals, your life becomes a circle that never gets anywhere. Second, he gives you a method: habit. Don't wait to want the right thing before doing the right thing. Do the right thing so you can learn to want the right thing. Third, he gives you a compass: the virtuous person as a reference. In Aristotle's Ethics, you learn by watching people who live well and asking, how do they choose? What do they avoid? What do they treat as a priority? And here's the human part. Aristotle doesn't promise a life with no conflict. He promises a life with more coherence. Desire doesn't disappear, it matures. It stops swinging between I give in to everything and I forbid myself everything. It becomes a force that works for you. Because wanting well isn't living less, it's living with direction. Deep down, his message is a reality check. You're not free just because you feel like doing something. You're free when you can choose what makes sense in the long run, even when the desire of the moment pulls the other way. And the beautiful part is that this isn't some mystical gift. It's a skill you build. Virtue, for Aristotle, is a kind of art, the art of guiding your own life. If wanting more becomes a problem, Aristotle would say, it's not because you want too much. It's because you want without measure and without purpose. Wanting in the right way is when desire points toward a life that truly flourishes, not a life that's only distracted. And once you start seeing that, even your inner feeling changes. You stop living while chasing the next peak. You start building a foundation. And for Aristotle, that foundation is what makes a kind of happiness possible that doesn't depend on your mood that day, other people's approval, or the next more. Stoicism starts with a split that sounds simple, but can change your whole life. There are things that are up to you, and things that aren't. Epictetus puts this right at the start of the Enchiridion, basically saying, if you mess this up, you'll suffer for no reason the rest of the way. Because a huge part of human pain doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the urge to demand that the world obey our will. What's up to you, for the Stoics, is mainly your judgment, how you interpret things, your intentions, your choices. What isn't up to you includes your body in many ways, other people's opinions, the economy, the past, the weather, illness, luck, and other people's behavior. And that's where desire becomes a trap. When you want to control what can't be controlled, you turn life into a fight you can't win. You start a war against reality, and reality doesn't apologize. Epictetus is tough and, at the same time, freeing. If you place your happiness in something external, you become a prisoner. Not because external things are bad, but because they're unstable. Tomorrow they change. Tomorrow they get taken away. Tomorrow they break. Tomorrow someone decides differently. The Stoic wants to protect the mind from that roller coaster. And that isn't coldness, it's dignity, living without selling your peace to chance. Seneca, in Letters to Lucilius, writes like someone who knows anxiety from the inside. He talks about ambition, wealth, fame, fear of losing, fear of not being enough. He notices something. The human heart chases things that promise security, but often deliver dependence. And then comes a Stoic idea that hits hard. You don't control life, but you can control your stance toward it. That stance is where freedom lives. Not the freedom to do everything, but the freedom not to be dragged around by everything. Marcus Aurelius, in the middle of power and the weight of being emperor, writes in Meditations like he's talking to himself, so he doesn't lose himself. He reminds himself again and again that the world is change, that people are flawed, that plans break, that life is short. But instead of turning into despair, it turns into focus. His question isn't, how do I avoid problems? But how do I act well despite them? That's Stoicism in its purest form. Desire doesn't disappear, it gets reorganized. You stop wishing the world were easy, and you start wishing to be fair, clear-minded, and steady. Now look how that fits our time. Today, a lot of people suffer from a modern version of impossible control, trying to manage other people's opinions. How many people live trapped by comments, likes, approval, validation? It's a kind of elegant slavery. A Stoic would say, other people's opinions aren't up to you. You can act well, but you can't control how the public interprets you. If you try, you break. And suffering grows because desire becomes, I need them to recognize me. You're asking the world for a guarantee it never signed. And it's not just social media. Think about the economy, the future, the fear of missing out, the what if it goes wrong? Anxiety is often the emotional name for the desire to control tomorrow. The Stoics don't deny that planning is useful. They deny the fantasy that planning is a guarantee. You do what's within your reach with excellence, and you accept that the final outcome has a part that isn't yours. That acceptance isn't giving up. It's maturity. Historically, Stoicism grows strong in an unstable world. Political crisis, regime changes, wars, inequality. It wasn't a philosophy for people with no problems. It was a philosophy for surviving with greatness when the world doesn't cooperate. Seneca saw intrigue and violence in Roman politics. Epictetus was enslaved. Marcus Aurelius dealt with wars and epidemics. And still the core stays the same. If you want peace, line up your desire with what's yours, your character, your choices, your principles. The Stoic method is basically a retraining of the heart. First, you train attention. What's happening outside and what's happening inside? Then you train judgment. Is this truly evil? Or is it just uncomfortable? The Stoics don't call everything good. They point to a difference. Discomfort isn't automatically tragedy, and a lot of tragedies begin when you interpret frustration as unbearable. Epictetus insists on a practical key. When something irritates you, scares you, or tempts you, ask, is this the thing itself, or is it my thought about the thing? Because your thought can be adjusted. He's not telling you to lie to yourself. He's telling you to see clearly. Sometimes suffering is an extra the mind adds on top. You lose something and think, my life is over. That over is the sentence that destroys you. The loss hurts, but the story can turn into poison. Seneca also uses the idea of rational anticipation, remembering that loss and change are part of life, not to live paranoid, but to avoid being caught like a child who believed a false promise of permanence. The Stoic doesn't say, this won't hurt. He says, this can hurt, and I can go through it without losing my integrity. Marcus Aurelius brings an almost spiritual tone. He talks about the role each person plays in the universe, and the importance of acting according to the human being's rational and social nature. For him, wanting well means wanting what makes sense for a creature who lives among other creatures. It means wanting justice, self-control, courage, wisdom, wanting to be useful, wanting to respond with greatness. See how the center shifts? Instead of, I want everything to work out, it becomes, I want to do what's right. And that is up to you. If you think about the future, this philosophy may become even more necessary. Life tends to get more unpredictable in certain ways. Fast change, crisis, too much information, pressure to perform. And the more unpredictable the world becomes, the stronger the temptation to control everything. But trying to control everything is the quickest path to burnout. Stoicism becomes an inner technology, a way to keep the mind steady in an unstable environment. But be careful. Stoicism isn't becoming a rock. It's not shutting off emotions. It's learning not to be ruled by them. A Stoic feels sadness, anger, fear, but trains not to turn those feelings into an inner dictatorship. It's like saying, I can feel this and still choose. That's Stoic freedom, not the freedom to never fall, but the freedom not to live on the ground. And here's the main point about desire. You suffer less when you stop demanding the world be your servant and start demanding virtue from yourself. When you move desire away from what isn't up to you and toward what is, life changes texture. You don't become invincible. You become less manipulable. You stop begging for guarantees and start building presence. In the end, Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius are offering the same proposal in different voices. Desire what nobody can take from you, the integrity of your character, the clarity of your mind, the quality of your choices. Everything else can disappear. That might feel scary at first, but then it brings something rare. You stop living as a hostage to the uncontrollable, and you start living as the author of what's yours. St. Augustine describes human desire as a thirst that can't fit in a small cup. It's a kind of hunger that won't be satisfied by just anything. That's where his most famous idea comes from, written in Confessions. The human heart stays restless as long as it tries to rest in things that don't have enough weight to hold the soul. The problem isn't desire. The problem is wanting something infinite and trying to cure that with something finite. It never adds up. Augustine doesn't speak like a distant philosopher. He speaks like someone who ran, tried things, got lost, fooled himself, and then looked back. In Confessions, he tells the story of a search. Pleasure, ambition, intellectual prestige, relationships, curiosity, the desire to be admired. This isn't the story of some exotic sinner. It's the story of a brilliant mind trying to solve in the wrong way a problem many people still feel today, the emptiness that comes back. What Augustine calls restlessness isn't just modern anxiety. It's deeper than that. The feeling that even when you win, something is still missing. You reach what you wanted and feel a strange silence. You achieve something, and instead of rest, a new demand shows up. Now I need more. Augustine reads this as a sign that the soul has an appetite the size of the world can't satisfy. The world offers things. The soul asks for meaning. In Confessions, he shows how desire can be a great servant and a terrible master. When desire rules, it pushes you outside yourself. You look outward for what only makes sense when it exists inwardly. And that doesn't mean rejecting the world or acting like life doesn't matter. It means recognizing a crucial difference. Finite things can be good, but they can't be absolute. When you turn something finite into your everything, you put a weight on it that it can't carry. And when it breaks, because it will break, you collapse with it. Augustine has a word for this: disordered love. It's not loving too much in a quantity sense. It's loving out of place, out of order. You put what's temporary on the throne of what should be lasting. Then your mood, your identity, your peace depend on what changes. That's a recipe for anguish, because everything finite is always at risk, ending, disappointing you, losing its shine, leaving you, being taken away. When Augustine says more, never balances the equation. He's exposing a logic that sounds reasonable, but is really a maze. If I get a little more, then I'll finally be okay. More money, more recognition, more pleasure, more influence, more safety, more control. But every more trains you to a new level. And instead of resting, the heart learns to run. Restlessness becomes a lifestyle. If you look at history, you can see this on a large scale. Entire societies have been trained to desire more as destiny. More land, more gold, more production, more prestige, more power. This infinite desire, when it attaches itself to finite things, creates not only individual anxiety, but also collective projects with no brakes. Hunger becomes empire. And the empire, even when it wins, doesn't rest, because the inner engine is still the same. Lack. Augustine, writing in a world shaped by major shifts in the Roman Empire, saw up close how outward greatness doesn't protect the soul from loss. Now bring this to today. Our culture is expert at turning restlessness into a marketplace. Advertising doesn't just sell products, it sells promises of completion. With this, you'll finally be the real you. Social media takes it even further. You don't just consume, you compare. And comparison is a machine that produces restlessness. There will always be someone with more beauty, more money, more trips, more charisma, more followers. If your heart tries to rest inside that game, you condemn yourself to exhaustion, because the measuring stick never stops moving. Augustine would say this restlessness isn't an accident. It's a signal. But we've learned to treat signals like defects. When emptiness hits, we rush to fill it. When silence hits, we turn on noise. When lack hits, we buy a distraction. But for Augustine, restlessness is almost like an existential alarm. It reveals you weren't made to be satisfied by things that pass. You can love those things. You just can't expect them to be God in your life. In Confessions, one of the most human pains is realizing that the wrong search has its own beauty. It gives you the feeling of movement. You feel alive because you're running. The problem is that running isn't the same as moving forward. Sometimes it's just escape with speed. Augustine describes how he wanted to be loved, admired, recognized, and how that made him more and more dependent. You become a beggar for approval. And the worst part is it feels normal, because everyone does it. That's why it's so easy to confuse restlessness with healthy ambition. But Augustine isn't preaching apathy. He's offering a new frame for desire. Infinite desire is real, so the question is where it's pointing. When it points to finite things, it becomes anxiety. When it points to the eternal, it becomes rest. In his language, that means directing the heart toward God. Even for someone who isn't religious, the philosophical point is strong. Human beings search for a kind of good that won't be eaten away by time. We look for a foundation that doesn't swing with the mood of the day or the instability of the world. And that has practical consequences. First, you have to identify where you're trying to rest your soul. Where are you placing your peace? In results? In status? In a person? In a career? In an image? If that gives you meaning, great. But if it controls you, you're living what Augustine describes, an infinite hunger trapped inside the finite. The result is you start treating something good as if it were necessary. And anything that becomes necessary becomes a source of fear. Second, Augustine recommends a kind of inner honesty that we often avoid today. He writes like someone talking to his own conscience, confessing, not to humiliate himself, but to stop lying to himself. Restlessness shrinks when you face your motives without makeup. When you admit, I don't want this just for this. I want it because I want to be seen. I don't just want security. I want to never feel vulnerable. Then you see the impossible thing you were trying to buy. Third, he changes how we think about pleasure. Pleasure itself isn't the villain. The villain is pleasure used as a substitute for meaning. When pleasure becomes anesthesia, it charges interest. The more you use it, the more you need. And that's true for everything: entertainment, shopping, food, notification dopamine, even overworking. If you smother restlessness, it comes back stronger. Augustine would say, the heart wasn't made to be silenced, it was made to be directed. And looking ahead, the problem may get worse. The more technology offers instant gratification, the more the heart becomes impatient with slow things. Real relationships, building character, maturity, silence, inner life. Infinite desire will be fed by finite stimuli that get more and more efficient. That's a restlessness bomb. You get used to quick hits of satisfaction and lose tolerance for the process. Augustine is almost like an antidote to this acceleration. He reminds us rest doesn't come from stacking stimuli. It comes from finding a center. At the core, Confessions is a portrait of the human heart trying to learn how to love without idolizing, to seek without losing itself, to desire without becoming enslaved. And the line that keeps echoing is simple. More doesn't balance the equation when the equation is infinite. As long as you try to solve a thirst for eternity with things that pass, you'll feel that restlessness like the soul whispering, gently but insistently, "This isn't enough." Spinoza enters this conversation like someone flipping the table. While a lot of tradition talks about desire as lack, as mistake, as danger, he says something almost shocking. Desire isn't a human defect, it's the very essence of being human. In ethics, desire isn't a psychological accident, a sin, or a weakness. It's the way life insists on living. The key word is conatus. Spinoza says that everything, as far as it can, strives to keep existing as what it is. That applies to plants, animals, and humans. In our case, this striving shows up as a drive to maintain and expand our existence. And when we become aware of that drive, we call it desire. In other words, desire is the human name for the power to exist. It's not a hole inside you. It's energy, direction, life force. But Spinoza doesn't romanticize it. Desire can lift us up or trap us. He just refuses the idea that the problem is desire itself. The problem is desiring blindly guided by outside forces, by images, by fear, by dependence. So the ethical question becomes, does my desire increase my power to act or reduce it? Does it make me more capable or more reactive, more free or more manipulated? In ethics, Spinoza breaks down emotions in a way that feels like engineering the soul. He separates actions from passions. When we are the true cause of what we do, when we understand and choose clearly, we are acting. When we're pushed by external causes we don't understand, when we're reacting, being dragged, being captured, we're in passion. And here, passion doesn't mean romance. It means passivity. An emotion can feel intense and authentic, but if you're being driven from the outside, you're less free. Two emotions are central in this view: joy and sadness. For Spinoza, joy is a move toward greater perfection, that is, greater power. Sadness is a move toward less power. He's not talking about happiness as smiling all the time. He's talking about life expanding or shrinking inside you. Some joys make you more capable, and some pleasures leave you smaller afterward. Some sadness paralyzes you, and some pain, once understood, becomes learning and makes you stronger. The test is, does this expand me from the inside or reduce me? This lens is powerful in real life. Take envy, for example. For Spinoza, envy is sadness paired with the idea of someone else's success. It reduces you because you start living through comparison, resentment, and dependence on how you look next to others. Gratitude, generosity, and friendship, on the other hand, tend to increase your power because they connect you to relationships that strengthen you. So desire isn't a monster to defeat. It's a current that can be channeled. And here comes one of Spinoza's most uncomfortable claims. We don't desire something because we judge it to be good. We judge it to be good because we desire it. That destroys the illusion that we're fully rational beings who decide first and only then want. A lot of the time it's the opposite. Desire pulls and reason becomes the lawyer, defending it. What looks like a conscious decision can be nothing more than a polished rationalization. If you look at history, this explains a lot. Entire peoples have been carried by collective desires: national glory, purity, revenge, wealth, fear of outsiders. And then came the explanations. It was necessary. It was good. It was destiny. Spinoza helps you see the mechanism. When a crowd is driven by sad emotions, fear, hate, humiliation, it becomes easier to steer. It desires protection and calls it truth. It desires an enemy and calls it justice. For Spinoza, politics is deeply emotional. Whoever controls feelings controls people. And in the present, this is almost a user manual for reading the world. The attention economy survives by capturing desire and turning it into habit. Platforms learn what hooks you, what engages you, what makes you anxious, and then feed you perfectly measured doses. The result is that many people live in passion in the Spinoza sense, reacting to the news, the trend, the provocation, the fear of missing out. You don't choose what you want. You get wanted by external forces. It feels like you're living, but a lot of the time you're being driven. Spinoza would call it a reduction of power, not because you're weak, but because your energy is being spent on reactivity. And reactivity has a cruel effect. It gives you intensity, but it steals depth. You feel a lot, but you choose little. You talk a lot, but you act little. You get fired up, but you don't build yourself. And that's exhausting. The Spinoza way out isn't moral preaching. It's understanding. He believes that understanding is freeing. When you understand the causes behind what you feel, you regain agency. You stop being only an effect and start becoming, as much as possible, a cause, not magic clarity. The mind, when it understands, reorganizes desire. And there's a beautiful point in ethics. Spinoza doesn't promise you'll defeat emotions through pure willpower. He says you transform feelings through stronger feelings, especially the ones born from knowledge. That's why he values what he calls adequate ideas. Understanding yourself, understanding human nature, understanding how passions work. This reduces superstition, fear, and guilt feelings that make us easier to manipulate. Historically, Spinoza was considered explosive for exactly this reason. He tried to think about God and nature rationally without feeding moral panic. That bothered people because a population guided by fear is easy to control. And a person who understands their emotions is harder to tame. So what does increasing your power mean in practice? It doesn't mean becoming unstoppable. It means building inner and outer conditions that make you more able to act, create, cooperate, and persevere intelligently. Spinoza has a very social view. Our power grows a lot when we connect in healthy ways. Friendship, collaboration, community, shared knowledge, all of that increases your real ability to live. Relationships built on control, dependence, and humiliation tend to reduce it. And here's how he'd read wanting more. For Spinoza, wanting more isn't automatically a sickness. It can be a sign of expansion. The problem is when that more is driven by sad emotions, more to prove your worth, more to silence insecurity, more to beat someone, more to avoid fear. That kind of more can bring external success and internal collapse because it's a desire born from emotional lack, not from real power. In the future, this difference will matter even more. With technologies that can predict behavior, shape stimuli, and influence preferences, the question, is this desire mine or was it planted, will become more serious. Spinoza would be a strong ally here. He doesn't tell you to distrust everything out of paranoia. He tells you to look at causes. If a desire makes you clearer, more active, more capable of loving and understanding, it probably increases your power. If it makes you more anxious, comparative, aggressive, dependent, it probably reduces you. And there's a final point in ethics that feels almost therapeutic. Spinoza's freedom isn't doing whatever you feel like. It's acting according to your nature as you understand it. It's no longer being pulled by blind impulses, and instead living with understanding. Desire remains, it is you, but it changes in quality. It stops being compulsion and becomes direction. It stops being escape and becomes construction. In the end, Spinoza offers a simple, radical filter for life. What in me is increasing my power to exist, and what is reducing it? If you start using that as a compass, desire stops being the enemy and becomes a tool. And maybe that's why this philosophy feels so current. It doesn't ask you to be less human. It asks you to become more the cause of yourself. For Hobbes, desire isn't a small detail of human life. It's the main engine. In Leviathan, he describes existence as a non-stop flow. One desire leads to another. One goal becomes a step toward the next. And stopping desire isn't peace. It's death. The human mind doesn't have a natural finish line, a moment where it says, "All right, I'm complete now." It runs on movement. And for Hobbes, that isn't poetry, it's a diagnosis. That's where a claim comes from that explains a lot. Humans don't chase one stable highest good. They chase power understood broadly as the ability to secure what they want in the future. Hobbes defines power as the present means to obtain some future good. That includes money, reputation, strength, influence, knowledge, alliances. And notice the detail. It's not only wanting pleasure right now, it's wanting security so you can keep wanting tomorrow. Desire, then, has an accumulating logic because tomorrow is uncertain, and fear of tomorrow puts pressure on today. The problem is that when everyone lives by that logic at the same time, a built-in competition appears. If I want to secure my future and you do too, our desires start bumping into each other. And when resources feel limited, land, status, opportunities, attention, that bump turns into conflict. That's why Hobbes talks about the famous state of nature, a situation where there's no common authority strong enough to enforce rules. In that condition, he says, there's a constant readiness for conflict because everyone has to protect themselves from everyone else. Not because people wake up evil for fun, but because without shared protection, self-preservation becomes the highest priority. Hobbes sums it up in a chillingly calm way. Where there is no common power, there is war. And war isn't just sword fights. It's a condition of ongoing distrust, where everyone is calculating risk all the time. And why does this grow out of desire? Because when desire turns into a race for power, it creates three sources of conflict Hobbes highlights: competition, to gain; distrust, to defend; and glory, to be recognized and to intimidate. Wanting more, then, isn't only personal. It can become the atmosphere of a whole society. This picture is incredibly useful for understanding history. Many wars and rivalries weren't only about ideas or values. They were also games of security and power. Empires expand because they fear being swallowed, and by expanding, they feed everyone else's fear. The arms race is a perfect example. Each side says it wants peace, but stockpiles power to guarantee its peace, and by doing that, it increases the other side's insecurity. The desire for security, paradoxically, produces general insecurity. Now bring that into today's world without forcing it. Hobbes's logic shows up anywhere there's perceived scarcity. In the job market, for example, the feeling that there isn't space for everyone pushes many people into constant competition mode. It's not just ambition, it's fear. In the digital world, scarcity takes a different shape. It's not land or gold, it's attention. And attention has become a kind of power. The more attention you capture, the more influence, more opportunities, more money, more ability to shape narratives. Then desire becomes a game that never ends. More engagement, more reach, more relevance. Hobbes would help you see something we sometimes pretend not to see. When more is the default, life becomes a permanent contest. and a permanent contest is exhausting. It creates anxiety, suspicion, aggression, because if everything is competition, other people stop being people and become threats or stepping stones. Friendship becomes usefulness. Trust becomes risk. And even identity becomes a defensive project. I need to look strong. I need to prove my value. I need to assert myself. That's glory in the Hobbesian sense. The desire for recognition as a psychological weapon. In Leviathan, Hobbes isn't only describing this, he's also explaining why a strong political authority seems necessary. The state shows up as the solution that interrupts the cycle. If there is a common power that can enforce agreements, people don't have to live with a knife in their belt all the time. Law for Hobbes is a kind of engineering against the worst side of human desire when it's left loose in total competition. But it doesn't solve everything, because desire keeps going. Law prevents open war, but it doesn't automatically change the human heart. Even in a stable system, there's still rivalry for prestige, money, status. Competition changes arenas. It moves into the market, politics, culture, reputation. And Hobbes is realistic about that. He doesn't imagine a world where everyone will just become virtuous, and that's it. He imagines a world where we manage inevitable conflict in less destructive ways. That's where the moral reflection gets interesting. If life is a chain of desires, then the problem isn't desire itself. The problem is when desire becomes a machine with no brakes, and worse, when it depends on someone else losing for you to feel alive. Hobbes shows how that can happen, even without conscious cruelty. All it takes is everyone believing they need more in order to survive. A sense of threat makes desire grow, and growing desire makes the threat feel bigger. It's a loop. If you think about the likely future, you can see this wheel speeding up in some areas. Technologies that boost productivity can also increase inequality, and insecurity and insecurity is fuel for competition. Automation can create fear of replacement. Artificial intelligence can become a concentrated advantage for a few. And when the feeling is, if I don't run, I lose, life turns into a Hobbesian psychological state even without literal war. Everyone against everyone, inside the mind. At the same time, Hobbes can be used as a warning. If you want to reduce social suffering, it's not enough to just preach, be a better person. You need institutions and cultures that reduce the sense of threat and the need for constant competition. Because for Hobbes, morality doesn't float in the air, it depends on conditions. Where there is fear, desire becomes a weapon. Where there is safety, desire can become cooperation. And on a personal level, Hobbes can sound dark, but he also shines a light on an intimate trap, the idea that when I reach X, I'll finally rest. For Hobbes, total rest doesn't arrive because desire is movement. If you try to find peace in a final victory, you'll live frustrated. The best you can do is learn to manage the flow. Choose which desires are worth the cost, which desires are just anxiety in disguise, and which desires throw you into a race you never consciously chose. One thing Hobbes makes very clear is that chasing future power can eat up the present. You start living like life is always preparation. And that has an emotional cost. You're never really here. You're always on the way. More becomes both promise and threat. A promise of safety and a threat made of fear. If you stop, you fall. So Hobbes's picture of desire as an endless engine has two sides. It explains why humans can create, conquer, and expand. We're never fully satisfied. But it also explains why humans can destroy, compete, and crush. We're never fully satisfied. The same engine that produces civilization can produce dehumanization depending on how it's channeled. And maybe the most Hobbes-like question inside your theme is this. When you want more, are you wanting life, or are you wanting protection from fear? Because in Hobbes, desire grows in the shadow of insecurity. And if you don't notice that, you can spend years competing for a peace that never comes. stacking up for a tomorrow that always moves away, chasing control in a world that always slips away. Hobbes doesn't offer romance. He offers clarity. Human life is desire in sequence. So the question isn't how do I escape desire, but how do you keep that engine from turning into a never-ending war outside you and inside you? Imagine reason as a GPS. It can map the fastest route, warn you about traffic, and reroute when needed. But it doesn't choose the destination. Desire chooses the destination. That's basically how David Hume sees the human mind in A Treatise of Human Nature. It's not reason that rules you. It's what you want, fear, love, and reject. Reason comes in afterward organized and efficient to justify, plan, and execute. That explains something everyone has seen or lived. You can fully understand what would be better and still not do it. You can know that going to bed early helps, that studying ahead prevents stress, that saving money gives you freedom. And still your body goes to your phone. Your finger opens a tab. Your mind invents a just 5 more minutes. For Hume, that just 5 more minutes isn't a lack of intelligence. It's proof that action is born from passion, and reason often becomes the PR team for what you already wanted. Hume even says reason is and should be the slave of the passions. He's not praising impulsiveness. He's describing how the system works. Reason by itself doesn't create movement. It informs, calculates, and compares means. But the yes and no that actually push life forward come from your drives and feelings. The consequence is strong. If you want to change a life, it's not enough to improve arguments. You have to work on desires, habits, rewards, environment, and emotions. And here's the central question of your theme. If reason serves desire, then how do you educate desire? Hume doesn't answer with preaching. He answers with moral psychology by watching how humans actually change. First, Hume shows that desires don't live in a vacuum. They're fed by associations. The human mind links ideas and feelings. If every time you seek validation you get a little relief, your brain learns that works and repeats it. If every time you avoid a hard task you feel immediate comfort, escape becomes a pattern. That's why some urges feel stronger than others. They've been trained, rewarded, repeated. Desire gets educated. The problem is that sometimes it's educated by accident. Second, Hume understands that morality doesn't come only from abstract rules, but from social feelings. Sympathy, a kind of empathy, approval, disapproval, shame, admiration. We learn to want certain things because we live among people. A teenager learns what matters from the vibe of the group. An adult learns what counts from the atmosphere at work. Nobody is neutral. Hume would say, if you want to educate your desires, look around and ask, without sugarcoating it, who is training my heart? Who is rewarding my impulses? Who is defining what I call success? This matters a lot today. Social media is a school of desire. It rewards what gets quick attention: looks, outrage, performance, comparison. An obedient reason finds excuses. It's networking. It's my brand. It's just for fun. Hume would say, be careful, because the mind is great at turning a craving into an argument. The point isn't to demonize technology. It's to notice that environments shape passions. If you live in a place that rewards anxiety, your soul learns anxiety as a lifestyle. Historically, this shows up on a collective scale. Think of eras of intense propaganda, heated nationalism, persecution. People weren't persuaded only by logical arguments. They were moved by fear, pride, belonging. And then speeches came later to give reasons for what was already chosen emotionally. Hume gives you a key for understanding why smart people can defend absurd things. Because intelligence doesn't rule, intelligence serves. If desire has been captured, reason becomes a sophisticated tool for self-deception. And the future may make this even more delicate. With systems getting better at predicting behavior, personalizing content, and triggering reactions, desire can be guided with surgical precision. You'll want things that feel like you, but were carefully provoked. Hume would be crucial here. He'd remind you that no mind is isolated, and what you consume shapes what you experience as natural. So how do you educate desire very concretely, in a Humean way? One strategy is to work with what Hume calls closeness and vividness. The mind is more moved by what's immediate than by what's distant. The future feels weak. The present feels strong. That's why big long-term promises, next year I'll change, have little power. If you want to retrain desire, you need to make the good thing closer and more vivid. Small goals, quick rewards, visible signs of progress. That's not weakness, it's human nature. Hume would say ignoring that is building a plan for an imaginary human and failing the real one. Another strategy is to replace feelings instead of only fighting them. Desire doesn't shut up because you scold. It gets redirected by a stronger desire. If you try to stop a habit with nothing but "I can't," but you don't build a new source of pleasure, belonging, or meaning, you create a vacuum and the old impulse comes back. Hume would bet on building new connections, linking study to satisfaction, training to healthy pride, discipline to freedom, friendship to calm. The heart learns by what it feels alongside something. And there's a key moral point in Hume. He believes the virtues that truly last are the ones that benefit human life individually and socially. He values qualities like kindness, justice, loyalty, and prudence, not because they're commands from the sky, but because they make living together possible and life more stable. That means educating desire isn't just self-improvement. It's becoming someone who can live with others without turning into either a threat or a victim. Here's a beautiful tension. If reason doesn't rule, it still matters a lot. It matters as an engineer. It organizes means, shows consequences, reveals patterns, and helps build environments. In other words, reason may not be the king, but it's the architect. It might not choose your first desire, but it can help train which desires will dominate over time. It can design a system where some impulses get reinforced and others get weakened. And maybe the most Hume-like question for your audience is this. When you say, "I want," do you really want it? Or were you trained to want it? And beyond that, does what you want make you more human, more free, calm, and fair? Or does it make you more reactive, dependent, and restless? Because if reason is the GPS, you can still choose better destinations. But that takes honesty. Recognizing that a lot of choice is emotion wearing the clothes of an argument. Hume gives you a realistic view, and that's exactly why it's powerful. You don't change your life with brilliant ideas alone. You change when you change what moves you. And educating desire is, above all, educating the conditions where your desires are born. Your habits, your company, your daily intake of stimuli, the rewards you accept, the values you admire. Reason serves desire, but you can teach your desire to serve a better life. Kant steps into the topic of desire by drawing a clear line. If morality depends on what I feel like doing, then it isn't morality. It's convenience. In Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, he makes a hard distinction between acting from inclination, desire, impulse, self-interest, and acting from duty. Not because desire is evil, but because desire changes. Today it points one way, tomorrow another. If desire becomes the law turns into foam. Kant's first idea is almost uncomfortable. An action can look good on the outside and still have no moral worth on the inside. Someone can help a friend because they like them, because it feels good to help, because they want to be seen as a good person. The act can be positive, but Kant would say, that doesn't prove morality. It proves inclination. The moral test starts when doing the right thing costs something, when it goes against the immediate impulse. That's when the key question shows up. Would I do this even if it gave me no pleasure, reputation, or advantage? Kant calls this acting from a good will. Goodwill is the choice to do what's right, not because it's pleasant, but because it's right. And for Kant, that's the core of human dignity, the ability to guide yourself by principles. You stop being a creature pushed around by appetites and become someone who can answer, what rule could I accept as fair for anyone? Here's the heart of the argument, the famous categorical imperative. Kant gives it in different forms, but the best known is the idea of universalizing. Act only according to a rule you could want to become a universal law. In simple terms, if everyone did this, would the world still work? If the answer is no, then your rule is selfishness in disguise. This method puts a direct brake on desire when it tries to justify itself. It forces the impulse to explain itself in front of a court that doesn't allow favoritism. A classic example, in spirit, without turning this into a technical lecture, is lying. Lying can be useful in the short term. It can save you, help you avoid consequences, get you what you want. Desire says, do it. Instrumental reason says, it works. But Kant asks, what if lying became a universal rule? The very idea of promise and trust collapses. So desire can bring a local win while destroying the foundation that makes social life possible. For Kant, morality protects the invisible fabric that holds people together. The second major formulation is even more human. Treat humanity in yourself and in others always as an end, never only as a means. Here Kant cuts desire off at the root when it turns into exploitation. A desire that uses people as stepping stones might be effective, but it's degrading. This applies to emotional manipulation, relationships where the other person is just useful, workplaces where people are reduced to numbers. Kant is saying, if your wanting more requires turning someone into a tool, you've crossed a moral line. And then comes the decisive point for your theme, moral freedom. In everyday thinking, freedom means doing what you want. For Kant, that's often the opposite of freedom. If you do everything you want, you can become a slave to your mood, your compulsions, your fear of losing, your vanity. Kant calls real freedom autonomy, the ability to give yourself a rational law and obey that law. It's like he's saying, being free means being able to say no to an impulse when that impulse drags you down. That changes your relationship with desire completely. Desire doesn't disappear, but it stops being the boss. It becomes the raw material of life, not the law of life. You can desire pleasure, success, recognition, but those things have no moral authority by themselves. They only enter the game after passing the test of principle. Does this respect people? Can this be universalized without breaking the rule itself? Does this protect my dignity and the other person's dignity? If you look at history, it's easy to see why Kant became so influential in modern ideas of rights and dignity, in times when interests, ambition, and political passion justified atrocities. The idea that every person has unconditional value acts like a barrier. A collective desire for more power can turn groups into objects. Kant pushes back and says, no. No matter how much you want it, no matter how much you gain, there are things you don't do because they violate the principle that makes humanity possible. And in the present, this hits a nerve. We live in a culture that often confuses value with desire. If I want it, it must be good. If it makes me feel good, it's right. Kant would be a tough antidote to that logic. He'd remind us that feelings can be sincere and still morally insufficient. An impulse can be intense and still unjust. And the problem grows when technology and markets amplify desire. The more stimulation, the stronger the inclination. The stronger the inclination, the easier the justification. Think about how this shows up in everyday life. When someone treats people like tools for status. When they promise and don't follow through because they change their mind. When they use a moral cause as marketing. when they consume something while knowing it depends on exploitation and say, everybody does it. Kant would ask, what rule is guiding you? And the answer is often uncomfortable. I deserve it. I can. No one will know. That's just how the world is. If you universalize those rules, they break the world. So they can't be moral law. In the future, the tension between desire and duty will likely become even more dramatic. With algorithms that learn your impulses and offer shortcuts, it'll become easier and easier to follow inclinations. Buy without thinking, consume nonstop, attack without reflecting, spread rumors without checking, treat people like avatars. The Kantian question will become a rare discipline. Did I choose this as a principle, or was I carried by impulse? In an age of fast responses, Kant demands pause. In an age of instant opinions, Kant demands responsibility. But Kant isn't preaching a gray life. He's defending dignity. And dignity, for him, isn't a cute feeling. It's the value of someone who can act out of respect for the moral law. That word respect is central. Kantian ethics moves through respect. Respect for yourself, not degrading yourself, and respect for others, not reducing them to tools. When you act out of respect, you're not obeying a whim, you're recognizing a value. That connects directly with your theme of wanting more. Kant wouldn't say wanting more is always wrong. He'd say wanting more cannot be your moral standard. If more runs over people, breaks trust, creates rules you wouldn't accept for others, then it's illegitimate desire. If more can coexist with universal principles and respect for humanity, then it can be part of a rational life. Kant offers you a mirror. He asks, do you want to be someone who acts because you feel like it, or someone who acts because you recognize what you must do? And he doesn't ask that to trap you. He asks to free you. Because for Kant, the freest person isn't the one who can do anything. It's the one who doesn't need to be ruled by impulse. And maybe the line that sums it up for real life is this: when desire becomes law, you become a hostage to your own moment. When duty becomes principle, you gain an inner stability the world can't buy. Kant calls that autonomy. And autonomy, in the end, is what lets you look at more and say, I might even want it, but I won't betray my principles to get it. That's not moralism. That's dignity in action. Schopenhauer looks at desire and doesn't see romance, progress, or fuel for achievement. He sees a machine. In the world as will and representation, he says that behind what we think are conscious decisions, there's a deeper, older force, the will. And this will isn't the everyday, disciplined will. I'll study. I'll improve. It's blind, nonstop, impersonal energy. The urge to want, to continue, to push forward, to survive. That's why, for him, desire has an unavoidable cost. As long as you desire, you lack. As long as you lack, you suffer. Lack isn't an accident. It's the default state. You only feel relief when a desire is satisfied, but that relief doesn't last long. Soon a new want shows up, or satisfaction loses its shine, or your mind gets used to it, or fear of losing it appears. Schopenhauer describes life swinging between two poles: pain when you lack and boredom when you have too much. Pain comes from not having enough. Boredom comes from the emptiness that shows up when desire goes quiet for a moment and doesn't know what to do with the silence. It sounds pessimistic, but he's trying to be brutally honest about something common. Happiness as a short peak. You reach the goal and for a few days, you feel warm inside. Then your emotional temperature returns to normal, and your mind is already aiming at something else. We call that ambition, or hunger for life. Schopenhauer calls it being a prisoner of the will. And the worst part, for him, is that a lot of the time you don't even choose what you want. You get chosen by this impulse that moves through you. Schopenhauer also separates reality into two layers. As representation, the world is what appears to us, Objects, people, stories, goals, images the stage. But as will, the world is the force that wants through everything the engine. And here he's provocative. Desire doesn't always start because you saw something and chose it. Often you see something because you are already desiring. You interpret the world through the eyes of hunger, and hunger always finds a justification. If you want an emotionally real example, think about how desire can disguise itself as necessity. I need this person. I need this recognition. I need this money. I need this lifestyle. Schopenhauer would say the will can speak every language just to keep itself alive. It becomes romantic love. It becomes pride. It becomes an ideal, a project, a competition. And when you believe that this specific thing is the key, you give yourself to it. But after some time, either you lose it, or you get used to it, or you realize it wasn't what you thought. And the will is already pulling another lever. That's why he says satisfaction is brief. Satisfaction isn't a state, it's an interval. And that explains why wanting more can feel like a treadmill. You run, your life fills up, and still there's an insistent noise inside like your soul is saying, not yet. For Schopenhauer, that not yet is the sound of the will running. Human history, seen through this lens, becomes a parade of huge desires and equally huge frustrations. Conquests, empires, revolutions, wealth, glory, and then new wars, new rivalries, new more. Not because humanity is evil by nature, but because the will is insatiable. It doesn't seek peace, it seeks continuation, and if necessary, it turns suffering into fuel. Schopenhauer, writing in the 19th century, watched modern pride in progress grow and answered with bitter irony. Progress increases our means, but it doesn't cure the wanting. Today, this feels even more current. Technology multiplied objects of desire. Screens, promises, comparisons, goals, numbers, likes, stimuli. The will got an endless buffet, and the result can be exactly what Schopenhauer described. More excitement, more restlessness, less rest. You get what you wanted alike, a purchase, a win, and you already want another. Satisfaction becomes a crumb between impulses. If the future keeps going this way, the treadmill gets worse. Personalized desires, instant rewards, non-stop entertainment. The will with direct access to your brain. But Schopenhauer doesn't stop at criticism. He asks, is there a way out? He offers two main paths of relief, and both have the feeling of turning off the engine, at least for a while. The first is art, especially aesthetic contemplation. When you get lost in music, a painting, a landscape, a powerful film, there's a rare moment when you're not wanting anything. You're simply seeing. For Schopenhauer, that's precious. It's like consciousness escapes the slavery of desire and enters an impersonal calm. You're not thinking, what does this give me? You're present. So art isn't a luxury. It's a pause in suffering. The second path is ethical and spiritual, compassion and the renunciation of certain desires. Schopenhauer is influenced by Buddhism and ascetic traditions. He believes consciousness can recognize the cycle and reduce its participation in it. That doesn't mean becoming a robot with no emotions. It means reducing the tyranny of wanting. And compassion matters, because when you realize other people are also driven by this force and also suffer, you stop treating the world like an arena for personal victory. You soften the inner war and the outer war. Notice how this hits your question. Is wanting more the problem? For Schopenhauer, the problem isn't this desire or that desire. The problem is the structure, wanting itself as a bottomless hunger. More never balances the equation because the equation isn't about things, about the will. You can switch objects 1,000 times and still feel restless. You can win and still feel tense. You can gain and still feel empty. Because the will doesn't want an object, it wants to keep wanting. That also explains why so many people, even when life is working out, feel a strange exhaustion. Success doesn't guarantee peace. Sometimes it's just fuel for bigger desires. And when life becomes a project of feeding the will, you can lose the ability to simply exist. Silence starts to feel scary, because without stimulation, boredom shows up. And boredom, for Schopenhauer, proves that desire wasn't filling you. It was keeping you busy. One important detail: Schopenhauer isn't saying every joy is fake. He's saying ordinary joy is unstable, because it depends on the temporary stopping of a lack. It's a temporary, not hurting. That sounds cold, but a lot of experience confirms it. You suffer far more from wanting and losing than you rejoice from wanting and gaining. And even when you gain, you adapt quickly. The human mind is fast at turning victory into normal. So if you translated his lesson into one direct human sentence, it would be something like, don't confuse movement with meaning. Desire gives you movement. It doesn't always give you meaning. And when you live only in movement, you get tired, because you're always running from lack, but lack is reborn inside the act of wanting. Schopenhauer is uncomfortable because he doesn't offer an easy, happy ending. He offers clarity, and that clarity can be freeing, realizing that many worries you chase aren't the solution, they're the symptom. They're the will asking for another dose. From there, the question changes. Not how do I get more, but how do I reduce the rule of wanting over me? How do I create spaces of contemplation, compassion, and simplicity, where the mind doesn't have to run? And maybe that's his strongest point. Once you realize satisfaction is brief, you stop betting your whole life on peaks. You start valuing moments when nothing is missing, not because you own everything, but because, for a moment, wanting goes quiet. For Schopenhauer, those moments are the beginning of any peace that's possible. Nietzsche takes the word desire and asks, are you wanting more because you're alive, or because you're wounded? That tension runs through Thus Spoke Zarathustra and gets cut open like a scalpel in On the Genealogy of Morality. For him, wanting more can be a sign of creative power, growth, and life affirmation, but it can also be a polished disguise for resentment, envy, and a wish to get revenge on the world. Here's the first big shift. Nietzsche rejects the idea that every desire comes from lack. He doesn't buy the story that wanting is always neediness. There is a kind of wanting that comes from overflowing fullness, a force that creates values, paths, art, courage. It's the desire to surpass yourself, to rebuild yourself, to reach new heights. In Zarathustra, this shows up like fire, the human being as a bridge, not a final destination, as something meant to be overcome. It's not more to cover a hole. It's more as real growth. But Nietzsche is also suspicious. He knows the human soul is talented at lying to itself. And that's where the central idea of genealogy comes in. Resentment. Resentment isn't just anger. It's anger that can't be released and turns into slow poison. It's the pain of someone who feels powerless in the face of someone else's strength and, unable to act directly, starts flipping values upside down. Instead of admitting, I wanted that and I didn't get it, the resentful person says, that's bad, that's immoral, that's dirty, and I'm better for not having it. That's what Nietzsche calls slave morality, a morality born not from creation, but from reaction. And that changes everything about desire. Because Nietzsche would say, a lot of the time, wanting more isn't I want to grow, it's I want the other person to fall. It's not I want to build, it's I want to prove you don't deserve it. It's not I want to affirm my path, it's I want the world to pay for making me feel small. Resentment is desire wearing a mask. It looks like justice, humility, virtue, but underneath it's revenge. That's why Nietzsche doesn't start by asking, what do you desire? He asks, where does that desire come from? Does it come from strength or weakness? From abundance or a wound? From creativity or comparison? because two desires can look the same from the outside. I want to win. I want to be recognized. I want to be great and be completely different on the inside. One comes from creative passion. The other comes from disguised hatred. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche sketches a type of person he despises. The last man, the one who doesn't want risk, height, or transformation. He wants comfort, safety, distraction. He wants a little of everything, so he doesn't feel anything too deeply. This type isn't evil. He's numb. And Nietzsche sees that as decline. A culture trading greatness for convenience, creation for consumption, will for entertainment. In that world, wanting more becomes just hunger for stimulation. More novelty, more dopamine, more validation. That isn't expansion. It's dependence. At the same time, Nietzsche also criticizes the other extreme. More as worship of raw power, empty domination. Because the will to power isn't simply bossing people around. At its deepest level, the will to power is the ability to shape, to turn chaos into work, to transform pain into strength. It's the artist who creates, a thinker who opens new paths, the individual who can handle their own solitude instead of living like the herd, the person who can say yes to life, not only to the easy parts, but to the whole package. And here's a powerful emotional point. Nietzsche respects pain, but he hates using pain as an excuse to poison life. He sees people who suffer, and instead of transforming, want to drag others down. That's resentment in action. He highlights a very modern psychological pattern. When I can't be, I attack being. When I can't create, I mock creators. When I can't rise, I call height arrogance. That's reactive desire. It needs destruction to feel alive. If you look at history, you can feel this conflict. Many social explosions mix two forces, the real desire for justice and the desire for revenge. Nietzsche isn't against justice as repair. He's warning about what happens when justice becomes hatred dressed up as morality. When that happens, collective energy stops building a future and starts enjoying punishment. And punishment gives a kind of pleasure that becomes addictive. The pleasure of watching the other person shrink. It's a dark more humiliation, more canceling, more mockery, more culture war. In the present, this hits hard. The internet amplifies resentment like an endless fuel source. Outrage gets attention. Scandal gets clicks. Comparison creates anxiety, and anxiety feeds consumption. A person feels like they're fighting for values, but inside they're just addicted to the taste of moral superiority. Nietzsche would call that a modern form of herd, not the quiet herd, but the outraged herd, feeling noble for hating together. And desire turns reactive. It doesn't want to create. It wants to react. But Nietzsche also offers a path toward creative desire. In Zarathustra, he talks about overcoming not as becoming perfect, but as becoming an author. Overcoming means looking at your own chaos and not running from it. It means turning resentment into creative force. It means stopping the habit of blaming the world and starting to shape what you can. And that's demanding because it involves risk. The risk of failing, not being applauded, being misunderstood. The herd offers comfort. Creation offers solitude and freedom. A Nietzsche-style test for wanting more would be, is this making me more able to affirm life, or more dependent on denying other people? If your desire needs an enemy, it's sick. If your desire needs to humiliate, it's reactive. If your desire needs to prove others are trash, it was born from a wound. But if your desire pushes you to produce, learn, build, create truer relationships, face challenges, expand your capacity, then it smells like power. Nietzsche also delivers a sharp critique of morality that turns weakness into virtue without admitting the cost. He's not saying, be cruel. He's saying, don't lie to yourself. If you don't act because you're afraid, don't call it humility. If you don't try because you're insecure, don't call it detachment. If you don't create because you fear judgment, don't call it simplicity. That honesty is brutal, but freeing. It brings back the real desire hiding behind excuses. And looking ahead, this could intensify in two directions. One is numbness. More comfort, more entertainment, more personalization, more easy life, and less courage to create something of your own. The other is resentful hyper-competition. More comparison, more performance, more hate as identity. Nietzsche would say both are symptoms of a culture that has lost love for creation. The challenge is to recover desire as a force of art, not as hunger for status. In the end, Nietzsche pushes you toward an uncomfortable, powerful question. When you say, I want more, do you want more life? Or more proof? More life is expansion. Grow, create, overflow, learn, endure. More proof is resentment. Win to silence a void. Humiliate to feel like somebody. Destroy so you don't have to face your own helplessness. That's why he's so difficult and so necessary. Nietzsche doesn't want you to kill desire. He wants you to purify where your desire comes from, to stop desiring through comparison and start desiring through creation, to stop wanting more as revenge and start wanting more as work. Because for him, the highest desire isn't the one that conquers the world. It's the one that shapes your own life and can still say yes to everything in it, the risk, the pain, and the beauty. You can try to erase a desire. You can pretend you don't want it, distract yourself, stay busy, become the most productive person in the world. For Freud, that doesn't solve the problem, it just moves it somewhere else. In the interpretation of dreams, he presents an idea that became a landmark. Repressed desires don't disappear. They come back in disguise. And when they return, they rarely show up politely. They come through strange dreams, symptoms, compulsions, irritations that seem for no reason, and patterns you swear you didn't choose. Freud calls repression the mechanism where certain wants, memories, or impulses get pushed out of consciousness because they create conflict against morality, against the person's self-image, against the rules of their environment, or out of fear of punishment or rejection. But for him, the unconscious isn't a dead basement. It's an active system. What gets repressed keeps looking for a way out like water pressing against a dam. If it can't leave through the front door of consciousness, it leaks through cracks. This is where the theme of wanting more gets deeper. A lot of the time, wanting more isn't just ambition. It can be an attempt to compensate for a void, cover up insecurity, or numb inner discomfort. And when that more becomes compulsive, Freud would suspect repetition. You're not only chasing a goal, you're repeating an emotional structure. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud argues that dreams are wish fulfillment, but not in a literal, simple way. Dreams are a stage where desire appears in disguise, because internal censorship, the part that watches and judges, is still present. That's why dreams speak through symbols, swaps, distortions. Without getting technical, the message is clear. Desire finds indirect routes. And if it can slip past the guard at night, it can also slip through during the day, in language, in slips of the tongue, in jokes that reveal too much, in choices that look rational, that carry old emotion. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud widens the lens. He says, civilization requires renunciation. To live in society, we learn to hold back impulses, delay satisfaction, respect rules, accept limits. That builds culture, science, art, social life. But it comes with a psychological price, inner tension. On one hand, repression makes social life possible. On the other, it can produce guilt, anxiety, symptoms, and explosions. Civilization protects us and squeezes us. His idea is uncomfortable. There is no society without conflict. there are societies that manage conflict. Because human beings have drives for pleasure, recognition, aggression, belonging. Culture says, control that, but total control charges interest. Freud is also sensitive to hypocrisy. When public morality is too rigid, private life often becomes full of disguises. Desire doesn't vanish, turns into secrecy. Historically, you can see this in periods of intense moralism. Societies with strong repression often produced hidden blow-ups at the same time. Double lives, scandals, neuroses, treated as weakness, and a huge need to look correct. Freud lived in a context where certain topics were forbidden, certain impulses were shameful, and social appearance felt like a courtroom. Psychoanalysis is partly born as a response. If you don't look at this, it will look at you. Now bring that to the present. Repression changed outfits, but it didn't disappear. Today, in many places, nobody says, don't talk about that. But the environment says, performing is mandatory. You have to look good, happy, productive, interesting. So desire blends with image. Wanting more also becomes needing to look like more. And that creates a modern kind of conflict. It's not only repressed desire, it's desire captured by comparison. And when desire gets captured, it turns into repetition. Freud has a famous concept, repetition compulsion. People repeat patterns that hurt them, similar relationships, similar choices, similar mistakes, as if they're trying to master an old story by recreating it. More can be that. More approval to heal a wound of rejection. More control to silence an old experience of helplessness. More achievements to compensate for feeling not enough. On the outside, it looks like ambition. On the inside, it can be a desperate attempt to fix the past using tools from the present. That doesn't mean every desire to grow is pathological. Freud isn't an enemy of desire. He's an investigator of what's underneath. The Freudian question is, who is desiring inside you? Is it your conscious plan? An old lack? A fear? An emotional habit? And here a key piece of discontents comes in. The role of the superego, the inner authority that demands, criticizes, and pressures. In many people, the superego is so harsh that life becomes a permanent courtroom. The person tries to please that inner judge with more performance, more perfection, more discipline, and still feels guilty. It's like running on a treadmill with someone yelling, "Not enough," in your ear. The effects show up in modern symptoms. Burnout, anxiety, imposter feelings, chronic irritability, compulsive spending, dependence on approval. Freud would say, it's desire trying to break out while control tries to crush it at the same time. That inner war drains you more than the outside world does. And the future may intensify this dynamic. With algorithms that know your tastes, your triggers, and your vulnerable hours, desire can be stimulated nonstop. You don't even have to imagine the object of desire. It appears on your screen, tailored for you, at the exact moment you're most vulnerable. That raises the risk of compulsions, not because technology is evil, but because it learns the shortest path to your impulse. Freud would probably say, we'll have more tools to satisfy desire quickly, and because of that, more difficulty tolerating frustration, waiting, and silence. And without those skills, the inner life becomes more fragile. So what's the Freudian way out? Not eliminate desire. It's bringing desire into words, into awareness, into understanding. Psychoanalysis bets on an idea that sounds simple, but is radical. When you name what drives you, you get choice back. What's unconscious has more power precisely because you don't negotiate with it, you obey it without noticing. When you recognize patterns, you can start interrupting repetition. And often wanting more loses its feeling of emergency once you see what it was really trying to repair. Freud also teaches humility. Some conflict is unavoidable. You won't become a person without contradictions. Maturity isn't erasing tension. It's learning to live with it without destroying yourself. And that fits your video theme directly. The problem isn't desire. The problem is desire as escape, desire as anesthesia, desire as repetition of a wound. Freud makes a strange but realistic promise. Not total happiness, but a little more freedom. Freedom from being pushed around by compulsions. Freedom from living hostage to what you don't understand in yourself. Freedom to replace the question, why can't I stop, with a more honest one. What is this desire trying to say? When you start listening, more stops being only a race and can become a meaningful choice. Lacan takes a very common human experience. I get something and I still keep wanting, and turns it into a thesis. Desire never fully completes. Not because you're ungrateful, and not because you lack willpower, but because desire doesn't work like a need. In his écrits and in his seminars, he insists, needs can be satisfied. Desire can't. Desire moves in a different territory, the territory of lack and language. The difference starts simply. A need is bodily. Hunger, thirst, sleep, shelter. You eat, drink, sleep, and it's solved, at least for a while. But demand is when a need turns into a request aimed at someone. A baby cries and isn't only asking for milk. It's asking for presence, care, a response. And in that space between what the body needs and what the other person gives, desire appears. For Lacan, desire is born where satisfaction is never perfectly exact, because what's at stake isn't only the object, but the bond, recognition, being seen. That's why more doesn't solve it. You can earn more money, get more attention, more achievements, more likes, more compliments. But if what you're trying to fill is a lack tied to the other person's gaze, to meaning, to identity, the feeling of incompleteness comes back. Life gives you things, but desire keeps asking, what does this mean about me? Am I loved? Am I desirable? Am I someone? Do I have value? And no object answers that once and for all. Lacan names the way desire moves. He says desire is metonymic, it slides. You believe you desire X, but once you get X, desire slips to Y. It's not just changing goals, it's structure. Desire clings to an object as if it were the key, but the object is really a substitute, a temporary address. Desire keeps moving because what it's after isn't the object itself, but something impossible to fully capture, the feeling of being complete. This becomes even sharper when Lacan says, man's desire is the desire of the other. That sounds scary, like he's saying nothing in you is really yours. But the point is more subtle. A lot of what we desire is shaped by other people's desire, by what others value, what brings status, what brings belonging, what brings love. A child learns early on. Certain behaviors attract attention, others push it away. And from there, desire becomes not only what I want, but what do I need to want in order to be loved, accepted, recognized. That's why language is central. You don't desire only with your body. You desire with words, stories, and symbols. You learn what success is, what beauty is, what the right life is, what failure means, what it means to be someone. And those words shape you before you even notice. Lacan calls this field of language, and meaning rules the symbolic. Human life for him happens inside that fabric. Names, categories, expectations. That's where desire takes form, and also where it gets trapped in certain scripts. A modern example helps without getting technical. Think about how the idea of the perfect life spreads. Body, travel, clothes, relationship, lifestyle. Many people don't desire a thing. They desire a sign. A symbol that says, now I've made it. But once you get the symbol, the question changes. Did I really make it? Did people see it? What if someone has more? The lack returns because desire was tied to the other's gaze, an invisible court that never closes. In this context, Lacan talks about the object A, Objet petit a difficult concept, but the intuition is powerful. There's always a something that feels missing, a leftover that desire keeps chasing. The object isn't a normal object, like a phone or a car. It's what makes desire light up, like a promise of completion. You can change the address of that something 1,000 times a person, a goal, an aesthetic, an achievement, and still feel it's not this, because the object A isn't what you grab, it's what grabs you. That's why Lacan can explain why desire becomes repetition. You repeat the chase not because you're stupid, but because desire's engine isn't to satisfy, it's to keep you desiring. In a way, desiring is staying alive, but that can go in two directions. It can become creativity and movement, or it can become a cycle of frustration and dependence, especially when you believe the next achievement will finally fix you. Lacan also messes with another uncomfortable idea. This self isn't as transparent as it seems. He talks about the mirror stage. The child recognizes itself in an image and organizes around that image, creating an I as a form. But that I is born tied to an external image and to the other person's confirmation. That means part of our identity starts with a small mismatch. We try to match an image of ourselves. And when desire sticks to that image, I need to be that, then more becomes an endless job of performing. Historically, it's easy to see why Lacan became so influential in a century shaped by advertising, consumption, and psychoanalysis. He describes a modern world where desire is constantly triggered by signs. The promise isn't buy this and you'll have a tool. It's buy this and you'll be somebody. And once desire goes down that road, the person becomes dependent on signifiers, brands, titles, status, numbers. More becomes the need for proof. In the present, this exploded with social media. Social media doesn't just sell content, it sells gaze. You post in order to exist in the other's eyes. You measure value through metrics. You desire reach, and reach is never enough, because it can always be bigger. In that world, Lacan feels almost prophetic. Desire feeds on lack and the other. So a machine that gives you a little recognition in quick doses creates an appetite that never ends. It's not individual weakness. It's the structure of the game. And in the future, with algorithms that learn your triggers and deliver exactly what lights you up, the Lacanian question becomes even more urgent. What in you is being desired by you, and what is being desired by the other through you? Because desire can be colonized. You start wanting what keeps you spinning, not what helps you live more truthfully. But Lacan isn't a moralist saying stop desiring. He's saying stop believing an object will complete you. Desire is structurally tied to lack, and that can be a tragedy or a liberation. A tragedy when you live like you're always almost arriving, always almost becoming someone. A liberation when you understand lack isn't a defect you must fix at any cost. It's part of being human, and you can work with it consciously. So what changes? Your relationship with more changes. Instead of chasing more to cover a hole, you can ask, what lack am I trying to solve with things? What kind of gaze am I begging for? What name am I trying to earn? What image am I trying to maintain? When you ask these questions, desire stops being a silent tyrant and becomes something you can read like a text. Lacan offers a line that sums up the pain and truth of the theme. Desire doesn't complete because it isn't a shopping list. It's a relationship with lack, meaning, and the other person. That's why more doesn't fix it when what you want, deep down, isn't a thing. It's an impossible guarantee. Being totally complete, totally recognized, totally safe. And when you see that, something rare can happen. You stop chasing the final object and start living with more clarity about what truly drives you. In Buddhism, the question isn't, why do I desire? It's, what happens to me when I cling to what I desire? The tradition doesn't start by blaming humans for being weak. It starts by describing a universal experience. The mind tries to hold on to what is unstable, and that's where suffering is born. In the sermon at Benares, where the Four Noble Truths are taught, the second truth is direct. There is a cause of suffering, and it tastes like craving, attachment, thirst that says, I need this to be okay. The first noble truth isn't pessimism, it's honesty. There is dissatisfaction in life. Even when everything looks right, something slips through your fingers because everything changes. Buddhism calls this dukkha, not just physical pain, but that feeling that the heart is slightly tight, like life is never fully settled. The second truth says, a big part of this dissatisfaction is fueled by tan, thirst, an anxious desire that clings, demands, and insists on permanence. The third truth points to a possibility. This thirst can stop. And the fourth offers a path, the Eightfold Path, a set of practices and attitudes that train the mind and shape the way you live. Notice the nuance. Buddhism isn't never want anything. It's learning the difference between healthy desire and attachment. You can want to eat, study, grow, love, build projects. The problem is when wanting turns into a contract with the world. Life is only worth it if this happens my way. That's when desire becomes a prison. Attachment has a tone of urgency and control. It turns things into absolute conditions for happiness. And when reality doesn't obey, the mind goes to war. That's why Buddhism talks so much about impermanence, anicca. Everything passes. Sensations, emotions, relationships, phases, possessions, even our image of ourselves. Suffering grows when we try to freeze what is fluid. You gain something and immediately start fearing you'll lose it. You love someone, and along with love, anxiety about control shows up. You achieve a position and become a hostage to maintaining it. Desire, when it clings, doesn't bring peace, it brings constant watching. The Dhammapada, a classic collection of verses attributed to the Buddha, returns again and again to the idea that an undisciplined mind creates torment, while a trained mind finds clarity. It's not saying don't feel. It's saying see what you're doing with what you feel. Buddhist practice is less about eliminating emotions and more about not being dragged around by them. It's the difference between having a desire and being possessed by it. A key point is that Buddhism sees the self as less solid than it looks. Not in the sense of you don't exist, but in the sense that what you call me is a flow. Body, sensations, thoughts, memories, impulses, everything changing. When you believe there's a fixed self that needs to be protected and proven all the time, desire becomes constant defense. I need to be respected. I need to win. I need to look good. Thirst grows because you're trying to hold up a statue that never stops shifting. The practice, then, is to see the flow without panic. This is extremely modern. Our culture trains attachment like it's a virtue. Grab opportunities, don't fall behind, build an image, maximize performance. But performance without awareness turns into chronic anxiety. Buddhism doesn't condemn effort. It condemns the mind that clings to results as if results were identity. When you place your peace in the outcome, you live tense. When you place your peace in an attentive process, you live lighter even while working hard. Historically, it's easy to see how anxious craving fuels collective suffering. Mass consumption, endless competition, the exploitation of people and nature to support more. Buddhism would call that institutionalized thirst, a whole society running as if nothing is ever enough. And the result shows up in modern symptoms. Burnout, depression, emptiness, fragile relationships, defensive aggression. Not because people are bad, but because they're being trained to desire without rest. In the future, this challenge may get stronger. The more technology offers instant gratification, the more the mind can lose tolerance for discomfort and waiting. Notifications, short videos, one-click purchases, instant answers. Thirst gets fed and rewarded quickly. And when real life doesn't deliver at that speed, It feels unbearable. Buddhism becomes a rare antidote. It trains the exact ability the future may weaken sustained attention and non-attachment. But non-attachment here isn't coldness. It's love without gripping. It's enjoying without trapping. It's appreciating without turning it into a requirement. You can love deeply and still understand you don't control the other person. You can achieve something and still not define yourself by it. Non-attachment is the art of holding with open hands. So how do you practice this? Buddhism begins with a simple and difficult skill: observation. When desire arises, instead of obeying automatically, you notice. There's craving here. You notice the body tightness, speeding up, restlessness, and you notice the story. If I don't have this, I won't be okay. That awareness is already half the path, because it creates space between impulse and action. Without space, you're a reflex. With space, you can choose. That choice is trained through mindfulness, sati, often cultivated through meditation. But mindfulness isn't some distant ritual. It's learning to be present when you eat, when you walk, when you speak, when you feel anger, envy, or neediness. It's watching desire rise, grow, and pass like a wave. The mind starts learning a truth that changes everything. Not every desire has to become an action. You can feel it and not follow it, and that skill gives you freedom back. The Eightfold Path also includes ethics: right speech, right action, right livelihood. Why? Because some desires increase suffering, not only inside, but outside. Lying, harming, exploiting, manipulating. These actions create consequences and reinforce toxic states of mind. Buddhism links desire to responsibility. What you feed grows. What you practice becomes you. And here's a powerful image for your theme: desire as fire. A small fire warms the house. An uncontrolled fire burns the house down. Buddhism doesn't want to put out every flame. It wants to prevent the wildfire. It teaches you to tell the difference between desire and compulsion, between seeking and clinging, between pleasure and dependence. So Buddhism doesn't promise a life without pain. It promises a life with less unnecessary suffering, the suffering born when you demand the world be stable, people be controllable, and happiness be guaranteed by an object. The Four Noble Truths are almost a map of the heart. There is suffering, there is a cause, there is an end, there is a path. And the path begins every time you notice thirst rising, and instead of chasing more, you breathe and ask, is this desire or attachment? Does this open me up or trap me? When that question becomes a habit, more loses its power to control you, and you start tasting a kind of peace that doesn't depend on winning. In Zen, the big shift is almost annoyingly simple. The problem isn't that you don't have enough, it's that you can't stop running. The mind lives like a dog chasing its own tail. Just a little more. Just one more win. Just one more answer. Just one more proof that I matter. And the more it runs, the more noise it creates inside. Zen points to that noise. The anxious search for more doesn't just tire you out. It keeps you from noticing the life that's already happening. Zen doesn't talk about desire only as an idea. It goes straight to where desire is born, the mental habit of chasing. That's why it can feel so direct and even unsettling. Instead of promising you a new object that will complete you, it gives you a practice that asks, what if you don't need to complete anything right now? What Zen wants to interrupt is the automatic movement of grabbing, controlling, accumulating, comparing. Because that movement is what creates the feeling of endless lack. Dogen, the author of the Shobo Genzo, is famous for being hard to read, but one of his core ideas is very practical. Practice and realization aren't two separate things. In other words, you don't practice so you can get there later. The act of practicing is already there. That breaks the mindset that feeds more, a mind that lives in the future. When I finish this, then I'll live. When I achieve that, then I'll rest. Dogen would say, if you turn life into preparation, you never live. You just stack up paths and lose the ground under your feet. In Zen, stopping the chase isn't quitting. It's stopping the habit of treating yourself like an unfinished project that needs to be fixed all the time. The anxiety of more often comes from an emotional place. The feeling that right now isn't enough, that you aren't enough, that the present is just a waiting room. Zen goes the opposite direction and says, return to what's here. Breath, posture, silence, a simple task. Not as an escape from the world, but as a return to what's real. The practice most associated with Zen is Zazen, sitting meditation. But the heart of Zen is that it doesn't stay on the cushion. Zen is the art of being present while washing dishes, walking, eating, listening to someone, writing, even being bored, because more feeds on distraction. When you're always far from the present, desire becomes a hole. When you return to the present, the hole loses power because you stop feeding the story of lack. Zen also emphasizes something pretty radical. Don't confuse thoughts with reality. The mind makes movies, scenes, comparisons, fears, fantasies. More is often a movie. If I have this, I'll be loved. If I achieve that, I'll be respected. If I get there, I'll finally breathe. Zen doesn't argue with the movie. It asks you to notice the screen. You realize you're thinking, and once you realize that, there's already space. In that space, the impulse weakens. That's why, in Zen, the present isn't a pretty idea, it's training. You learn to notice the body's tension when desire fires up. You learn to notice the tight chest, the rush, the urge to grab your phone, to look for confirmation, to fix everything right now. And instead of obeying, you do something simple. Breathe, feel, return. It's not mysticism. It's mental hygiene. Historically, Zen grew in environments where simplicity was discipline. Monasteries, work routines, ceremonies, gestures. This aesthetic isn't just beautiful, it teaches. It cuts excess. It reduces noise. It trains a different relationship with time. Instead of life as a race, life as presence. And that speaks directly to your theme. Zen doesn't say, don't desire. It says, see what chasing does to you. See how it splits you. See how it pulls you out of your body. See how it makes you unable to rest, even when you're standing still. The modern world is almost a perfect lab for Zen's critique. We've never had so much more available. More content, more stimulation, more products, more opinions, more comparison. And at the same time, it's never been easier to feel like something is missing. Because the mind is fed by an endless stream and learns to feel insufficient. Zen would say, this is like living in a room full of noise. You start thinking it's normal not to hear your own breathing. And here's a subtle Zen idea. The anxious search for more is a kind of violence against the moment. You're always squeezing the present so it turns into the future. You're always trying to extract something from now, productivity, recognition, results. And when now doesn't deliver, you reject now. Zen calls this losing intimacy with life. You're alive, but you're not present. You exist, but you don't inhabit your life. Dogen has a way of talking that hits this. He ties time and being together, like they can't be separated. To live is to be time. What you are right now matters. How you breathe right now matters. How you look right now matters. Because this is where life happens. And that's not abstract philosophy. It's a call to stop waiting for life to start. Zen also pokes the ego with both gentleness and firmness. Chasing more is often tied to the question, who am I? If I have, I am. If I achieve, I am. If I look a certain way, I am. Zen breaks that because it doesn't hand you a ready-made identity. It gives you practice. You don't need to prove you need to be here. It's like it's saying, before you become somebody, just be. And that Being isn't a concept. It's a body sitting, a step taken, a cup held, a silence carried. And in the future, Zen's message may become even more urgent. With a high augmented reality and more personalized stimulation, the mind can be pulled out of the present even harder. Life can turn into a sequence of impulses guided by recommendations. Zen offers resistance, the ability not to be dragged, the ability to choose not to follow every urge, the ability to sit with discomfort without turning it into panic, the ability to come back. So stopping the chase isn't becoming passive. It's taking your inner direction back. It's doing less with more clarity. It's living with more wholeness. And there's a beautiful paradox. When you stop running after more, many things become clearer, richer, more real. You realize simple life isn't poor. It just doesn't scream. At the core, Zen is teaching a rare kind of courage. The courage to stay with what is. Stay with the breath. Stay with the sensation. Stay with the task. Stay with joy without gripping. Stay with sadness without turning it into drama. Stay with emptiness without filling it by running. Because chasing is born from fear of silence. Zen turns silence into home. And maybe the line that sums it up is this: more creates noise. Practice brings you back to presence. When you return to the simple and the present, you don't lose your life, you stop losing it. Taoism looks at wanting more the way you'd look at a river being forced to climb a mountain. You can try. You can push, insist, squeeze. But the result is usually tension, exhaustion, a loss of rhythm, and in the end, the water finds another way. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi, and the Zhuangzi, you see a proposal that sounds simple, but runs deep. Wanting less isn't poverty, it's harmony. It's removing the extra ambition that throws life off balance and learning to act in a more natural way, more in tune with how things actually flow. Taoism isn't against goals. It's against the mind that turns goals into war. When ambition grows too big, it creates an inner state of forcing. You live tense, always behind, always comparing, always demanding more from yourself and the world. That distorts your vision. You lose sensitivity to what's really happening. You become someone who steps on the present to reach a future that never arrives the way you imagined. Taoism calls this losing the Tao, losing the way. The Tao in Laozi is hard to define because it isn't a thing. It's how reality works when it isn't being bullied. The rhythm, the natural order, the way change moves. And when a person tries to control too much, they put themselves against that rhythm. Life becomes resistance. The mind becomes rigid. The person becomes like a stiff branch. It looks strong, but it breaks easily. That's where the most famous and most misunderstood concept comes in. Wu Wei, action without forcing. It's not laziness. It's not passivity. It's acting with minimum friction and maximum awareness of the moment. It's doing what needs to be done without turning what needs to be done into drama. It's the kind of action that flows because it's aligned with the situation, not with the anxiety to prove something. Wu Wei is the art of not wasting energy on useless control. The Tao Te Ching keeps saying that too much desire creates disorder. When you want too much, you start confusing value with possession. You create fake needs. You trade peace for a race. And worse, you feed a kind of hunger with no bottom, because the mind gets used to more. Today you want one thing. Tomorrow you want two. Then 10, and you still call it motivation. Laozi would say that isn't motivation. It's agitation. Taoism values simplicity pu, the idea of uncarved wood, a state of not being warped by too many expectations, too much performance, too much ambition. Uncarved wood doesn't mean ignorance. It means naturalness. It means you don't need to be complicated to have value. In human terms, you can live without turning every day into a test of your worth. The Zhuangzi explores this with humor and stories that feel like paradoxes. It often shows how too much effort can be exactly what blocks success. In some passages, a craftsman does something perfectly, not because he tried harder than everyone, but because he was so in tune with the movement that the action almost happened by itself. It's the difference between fighting reality and dancing with it. When you force, you get heavy. When you flow, you get precise. If you look at history, you can see Taoism acting as a critique of times of rigidity and obsession with order. In ancient China, there was constant debate about government, discipline, hierarchy. Taoism shows up as a voice saying, "Be careful, too much control produces chaos. The harder you squeeze, the more resistance you create. The more you impose, the more rebellion you manufacture." That applies to politics, family, school, and also to your relationship with yourself. An over-controlling self can create a rebellious, self-sabotaging, exhausted self. Today, this critique fits perfectly. Modern culture turned life into a project. A body project, a career project, an image project, a productivity project. You become your own manager 24/7. It feels powerful, but it's exhausting. Taoism would ask, are you living your life or managing your life? Because too much management kills flavor. It replaces presence with an emotional spreadsheet. And Taoist, want less doesn't mean want nothing. It means reducing artificial desire, the desire that comes from comparison, status, fear of falling behind. It means wanting what is enough. Laozi praises knowing contentment, not as settling, but as wisdom about limits. Limits are what keep a boat floating. If you load it too much, it sinks. The mind is like that. Wu Wei also changes your relationship with time. Excess ambition locks you into the future. Taoism calls you back to timing. Plant in the right season, harvest in the right season. It teaches patience not as waiting passively, but as respecting ripening. You don't pull a plant to make it grow faster. If you pull it, you kill it. Some things only happen in their own time. Learning, healing, trust, maturity. Forcing, that is how life gets thrown off. And looking ahead, this philosophy could become even more valuable. If the world gets faster, more automated, more flooded with stimulation, wanting more can turn into constant noise. Anxiety can be sold as a virtue. If you're not running, you're losing. Taoism offers a soft resistance, the ability not to panic with the crowd, the ability to choose what's simple and sustainable, the ability not to confuse speed with direction. Taoism also has an implied ethics. Wanting less often means doing less harm. Less consumption driven by vanity, less competition driven by ego, less destruction driven by greed. When you don't need to inflate your desire to feel valuable, you become less aggressive toward the world. That's harmony on two levels. Inner harmony, less tension, and outer harmony, less destructive impact. In practice, want less can begin with very direct questions. Is this a real need or a manufactured desire? Does this move me toward a lighter life, or does it throw me into a race? Am I acting because this is the natural next step, or because I want to prove something? Am I forcing a door that won't open, or ignoring an easier path because it doesn't feed my ego? And here's a powerful Taoist image. Water. Water doesn't force, yet it wins. It goes around obstacles, adapts, finds openings. It's soft but persistent. Wu Wei is acting like water, flexible without being weak, steady without being rigid, effective without being aggressive. Excess ambition, by contrast, is like a stone trying to swim heavy, stiff, exhausted. Taoism doesn't promise you more. It promises alignment. It doesn't say, conquer everything. It says, don't lose alignment with yourself. It doesn't say control life. It says, learn life's rhythm. And the harmony that comes from that isn't hype. It's a calm that comes from stopping the fight with what's unavoidable and stopping the invention of needs that make you dependent. The lesson is clear. Too much ambition throws life off balance because it creates rigidity, hurry, comparison, and anxiety. Want less isn't quitting the world. It's quitting the illusion that you need endless things to be whole. When you practice Wu Wei and simplicity, you don't become smaller. You become more aligned. And when you're aligned, even effort feels lighter because you stopped fighting the river and started moving with the way. Confucius doesn't see desire as an inner enemy that must be crushed. He sees it as raw material. It can become virtue or it can become chaos. The central question in the Analects isn't how do I eliminate my wants? It's how do you shape a human being who can desire with dignity? Because for Confucius, the real disaster isn't wanting a lot. It's wanting without moral education, without responsibility, without care for other people. That's when desire becomes selfishness, and selfishness becomes disorder. Confucian thought starts from a practical view. Nobody is born finished. A person becomes a person, and a person becomes a person inside relationships, family, community, tradition, duties. That's why desire needs cultivation. Cultivation is the right word here. It's not blind repression. It's patient formation. It's learning to turn impulse into character. Desire is energy. Character is direction. In the Analects, Confucius talks a lot about Li rituals, forms, standards of conduct. Today, the word ritual can sound empty, like rules without soul. But for Confucius, it's the opposite. Li is form that trains the heart. It's gestures, habits, and norms that teach respect, self-control, gratitude, and care. When you learn to act with consideration, greeting people properly, listening, waiting your turn, treating elders well, carrying yourself with dignity, you're not just following etiquette, you're educating desire so it doesn't become a tyrant. And why does that matter? Because desire, without breaks, tends to demand priority. It wants it now. It wants it for itself. It wants it without thinking about the impact. Confucius sees this as the root of many conflicts. Families broken by selfishness, rulers corrupted by ambition, friendships destroyed by impulsiveness. Ritual, then, works like a frame that stops the self from taking over everything. It creates a space where the other person matters. But Confucius isn't only about form. He insists on Ren, often translated as humanity, benevolence, or being truly human. Ren is a quality of heart, empathy, generosity, commitment to the other person's good. Li without Ren becomes theater. Ren without Li becomes emotional chaos. Confucian ethics wants both, heart and form, intention and practice. That matters because desire isn't educated only by ideas. It's educated by routine. You learn to want better by living better. Mencius, a major Confucian thinker, goes deeper with a famous idea. Human beings have sprouts of virtue-early tendencies toward compassion, a sense of justice, respect, and discernment. It's like there's a moral potential that can grow, but a sprout needs care. If you ignore it, it dies. If you feed it, it becomes a tree. Mencius uses cultivation images because morality, for him, isn't a button you press. It's ongoing formation. And that applies to desire too. Desire is inevitable, but the way it becomes action depends on cultivation. This is very useful for your theme of wanting more. Confucius would say, wanting more can be good when it means wanting to be better, wanting to serve better, wanting to honor commitments. But wanting more can be destructive when it becomes ambition without responsibility. The difference isn't the size of the desire. It's whether it lines up with what's right and with what protects relationships. If you look at history, it's easy to see why this philosophy shaped whole societies. Confucius lived in a time of political instability and conflict between states. He believed public disorder begins with private disorder. Rulers without virtue, families without respect, people without a sense of duty. For him, Harsh laws don't help if people don't have character. The desire for power, when it isn't educated, produces tyranny and corruption. And then people suffer because those who should lead are chasing personal advantage. That feels extremely current. Today, many crises of trust in politics, institutions, even relationships come from the same issue: power without moral formation. Confucius would be blunt. Skill without virtue is a risk. Intelligence without character is danger. And when a culture celebrates only performance and results, it educates desire to win, not to serve. The result is a society with many successful people and little trust. Confucianism also emphasizes relational responsibility. You're not an isolated individual. You're a child, a friend, a student, a coworker, a neighbor. That isn't a prison, it's reality. And desiring with maturity means taking those roles seriously. For example, I can desire success without betraying people. I can desire wealth without destroying my health and my family. I can desire recognition without manipulating or humiliating others. Confucius would call that yi rightness, a sense of justice. It means doing what's right even when desire wants shortcuts. And here's the human part. Confucius doesn't expect instant perfection. He talks about gradual learning. In the Analects, there's a strong emphasis on daily practice. Studying, observing, correcting yourself, respecting teachers, choosing good company. Because desire learns through imitation. If you hang around people who live to show off, your desire learns showmanship. If you hang around people who live to serve and improve, your desire learns dignity. That's why Confucianism values example so much. A moral leader teaches more than a speech ever will. In the digital world, this takes a new shape. Today, rituals and examples also come through algorithms. What you consume, who you follow, what you admire, what you call an ideal life. The Confucian question becomes sharp. What is shaping your desire? Are you being educated by virtue or by vanity? By care or by comparison? By responsibility or by the rush to prove your worth? The future will likely make moral formation even more necessary. With more powerful technologies, a person without character can cause bigger damage. And a person with character can build better things. Confucius would say the center of the problem was never the tool, it's the person. If desire isn't educated, it uses any tool to inflate itself. If desire is educated, the tool becomes service. So how do you educate desire in Confucian practice? First, through trained self-control. Don't act on impulse when the impulse will hurt someone or embarrass you later. Second, through attention to small things. Respect in speech, care in listening, discipline in commitments. Confucius believes great character is built from small habits. Third, through responsibility in relationships. Repairing mistakes, apologizing, keeping promises, treating people with humanity, especially when there's no immediate advantage. There's also an ideal of balance. Confucianism values moderation, not as a passionless life, but as a life without loss of control. An educated desire is a desire that fits a whole life, not just a moment. It doesn't destroy the future to please the present. It doesn't destroy relationships to inflate the ego. Confucius and Mencius offer a solid answer to your theme. The problem isn't wanting, it's wanting without moral formation. Desire needs cultivation because human beings are shaped by habits and relationships. And when desire is educated through ritual, responsibility, and benevolence, it stops being a threat and becomes a force for building family, community, trust, a dignified life. Instead of more as a race, it becomes more as maturity, more character, more respect, more humanity. Thank you for giving your time and attention to a topic that really hits us on the inside, because understanding desire is, deep down, understanding what moves us, what traps us, and what can set us free. If this video helped you in any way, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because I'm going to keep this series going with more philosophy applied to everyday life. No fluff, just depth and clarity. And help me take this content further. Like the video, because that helps it reach more people. Share it with someone who's caught in this more and more. Grind, a friend, a sibling, someone you know relate. And I really want to hear from you. Comment below which of these thinkers hit you the most and why. And if you disagree with any point, even better, comment that too. Philosophy is born from debate. And don't leave the channel now. Click the next video that's showing up, because there's more content like this for you to keep going deeper and connecting these ideas to your life. See you in the next one.